I have simply found that in my listening practice, in my spiritual companioning space, there's almost no conversation where grief is not present. Loss is this universal place that we find ourselves as human beings, and I also find that grief and grief conversations are doorways into authenticity. There's nothing to be hidden when we finally acknowledge and name and surrender to the process of exploring our own deepest emotions, our own loss. And so while I have always felt native to melancholy, native to the harder emotions, I was aware that my knowledge and my understanding around grief and the capacity to hold space in the midst of someone's process was something I wanted to become more proficient at. I wanted to expand that ability to hold space in that way. And so when this program came up, I knew it was exactly the right time, and it was exactly what I needed to continue my learning.
So I found myself being drawn to Grief Companionship because I am of a certain age, most primarily, and I'm noticing just how much those around me and those that I care about are no longer with us. And also noticing some of my, I'll just call it discomfort around how to appropriately respond to people in those moments. That and the loss of my father was a time in my life where I really didn't have an opportunity to grieve right away. There was a lot of things that were happening in my life, and I was pregnant with my youngest son. And so that grief, I have come to discover, mostly through this program, was something that was underlying and impacting my everyday. So just being present to really what is in front of me and also within me really was the thing that drew me to want to be a grief companion for others.
I find the more I lean into sorrow, the more I lean into my own grief, the more I lean into other people's grief, the more I find my heart opening, and the path kind of opening up before me. As I look kind of very broad picture at where we are in culture right now, and where we are in our society, in the United States especially, it seems to me that grief is such important work that we need to be doing. It's part of the healing work that we need to be doing to kind of reshape the culture so that we can become this multicultural, multiracial democracy, I hope. There's so much grief that has been largely suppressed, probably for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And as that comes up, we have to deal with it. We have to deal with it. We have to face it. And it's in the facing of that grief that there's this opportunity then to kind of build relationships, to listen to one another across some of our big divides and hear the grief that is driving a lot of our division, which gives us hope, I think, for a future that is more embracing and more loving. So for personal reasons, for reasons of relationship with people that are important to me in my life, or even these bigger cultural reasons, I have found this training to be tremendously useful, tremendously helpful.
Since participating in the Grief Companionship course at the Metta Center in the fall of 2023, I have just felt so much more grounded in my ability and my capacity to receive the grief stories of others, to know how to companion them, to know what it is they might need, to listen and enter into the story with them. And I really desire, it's always been part of my hope in my practice, to support those who are always caring for others, especially in spiritual care. Clergy, chaplains, hospice workers, there are not enough spaces of support for those who are in the trenches in really, really difficult situations, holding space and holding the grief of others and the trauma that others experience. So my hope is to use this training not only for my own spiritual direction practice and for retreats, but also to create spaces that are uniquely able to hold the space for the grief and loss that is compounded when someone is a caregiver.
The way that I view my future with Grief Companionship really is an extension of my current spiritual guidance practice. Though I say that, and I also recognize that as you become more familiar with holding space for others in the grieving process, there might be other opportunities for me to really stretch into different areas. But currently, I'm really interested in just having it be an extension of sitting with the people that I currently sit with. I think even in the course of just being a spiritual guide, grief comes up often. So you don't really have to search it out. It's something that presents itself. But there certainly is areas that I could see in the future, maybe searching out, whether that's with folks in hospice or, certain areas where grief is much more prevalent and certainly the focus. So we'll see. We'll just see where this ends up going. But for right now, my spiritual guidance practice is my primary focus of how I'll serve as a grief companion.
Into this training process, my intention in terms of whom to serve was primarily others who are part of the LGBTQ plus community. I'm part of that community, and I'm so aware of how much grief that community carries. There's the obvious griefs, but there's so much what we would call disenfranchised grief. Grief that isn't recognized either by society at large or in many cases even by people themselves. They just don't name it as being grief, but there have been these huge losses that people have faced in their lives. And so I have this intention of, among others at least, serving the LGBTQ plus community, the queer community. And the interesting thing is, as I've gotten into this, other kinds of opportunities have opened as well to accompany people. So I'm not sure. Sometimes we have our plan and then the Spirit leads us in a different direction. So I'm not quite sure where this is all going for me. But even with this intention, that first fall when I was going through this process, there was this suicide on campus, and it led to meeting with one of my students who isn't queer, but who had had a friend who had committed suicide in the same time frame, and he needed somebody to talk to. I'm very open to where the Spirit may be taking me in this work. So we will see.